Get her off the plane. The captain's voice cracked through the first-class cabin like a whip, his finger pointed straight at the woman in the burgundy suit. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She simply stood, took the handle of her carry-on and walked down that aisle with her head high, while somewhere behind her, a flight attendant staring at a tablet went pale because she had just figured out exactly who they were throwing off this aircraft. $200 million a year was about to roll off Flight 1174 on 4 small suitcase wheels, and the man who ordered it wouldn't understand what he'd done until his own airline's vice president called him, voice shaking, 3 hours later. But let's rewind, because Marlene Bishop didn't board that plane looking for a fight. She boarded it looking for a window seat and 4 quiet hours with a spreadsheet. Marlene Bishop, 52, settled into Seat 3A on Transcontinental Airways Flight 1174 from Atlanta to Seattle. Deep burgundy suit pressed sharp, silver-streaked curls, a leather portfolio that had logged more miles than most pilots. She wasn't famous. Her face had never been on a magazine cover. If you passed her in an airport, you'd guess professor, maybe accountant. You would never guess that this calm, unassuming black woman was the global director of procurement for Hale and Marrow Industries, a multinational with 61,000 employees, and that her signature sat at the bottom of the single largest corporate travel contract Transcontinental Airways had. $200 million a year, 40,000 employee flights annually. Entire divisions routed through Transcontinental's hubs because Marlene Bishop 8 years ago had decided they'd earned the business. She didn't own a single share of the airline. She didn't need to. She owned something more dangerous, the pen that renewed the contract. And the renewal meeting was in 11 days. None of the crew knew that. To them, she was just a passenger. And to one man in particular, Captain Dale Whitfield, 58, 4 gold stripes on each sleeve and 31 years of never once being told no, she was about to become the wrong kind of passenger. It started small, the way these things always do. Marlene had boarded with the first group, stowed her bag, and opened her laptop. Across the aisle, a man in a golf polo gave her the slow, skeptical once-over she'd been receiving for 5 decades, then went back to his phone. She didn't react. She'd stopped reacting somewhere around 1994. The trouble arrived wearing a cream coat. A woman stopped at row 3, looked at Marlene, and frowned. "I think you're in my seat." Marlene checked her boarding pass, calm as still water. "I'm in 3A, you may be 3B." The woman didn't sit. She turned and walked straight to the galley, and Marlene watched the conversation unfold in the reflection of the polished cabin divider, the woman gesturing, a flight attendant nodding, both glancing back at row 3 with that particular expression that says something here doesn't add up. Except everything added up. The only thing that didn't fit their math was her. What Marlene didn't expect was for the cockpit door to open. Captain Whitfield emerged the way some men enter every room like it owed him rent. He'd been told there was a dispute in first class, and in his mind he'd already solved it before he saw it. He marched to row 3, looked at the woman in the cream coat, looked at Marlene, and made his decision in under 2 seconds. "Ma'am, you're going to need to move." "I'm in my assigned seat, Captain. 3A, you're welcome to verify it." "I don't need to verify anything on my own aircraft." His voice was rising now, and the cabin was going quiet row by row, phones tilting upward. "I need you to comply or I need you off this plane." "I'd like a supervisor to check the manifest," Marlene said evenly. "It will take 90 seconds. And that's when he pointed, arm fully extended, finger aimed at her face, voice loud enough to reach economy. "Get her off the plane, now." The cabin froze. And Marlene Bishop, who had negotiated against sharper men than this in 11 countries, simply nodded once, closed her laptop, and reached for her bag. Nobody stood up. That was the part Marlene would remember longest, not the captain's finger, not the shouting, but the silence that followed it. 30-some passengers in that cabin, and not one voice said wait. The man in the golf polo suddenly found the safety card fascinating. The woman in the cream coat studied her phone like it held scripture. A young flight attendant near the galley, the one holding the tablet, opened her mouth, then closed it. Her name was Priya, and she would matter later. But in that moment, she did what everyone else did. Nothing. Marlene rose without hurry. She smoothed her burgundy jacket, slid her laptop into the portfolio, and pulled her carry-on from the bin herself before anyone could touch it. 2 gate agents had appeared at the front of the cabin, summoned by the captain's radio call, hovering with the awkward energy of men who'd been told to remove someone and were quietly relieved she was removing herself. She walked the aisle the way she walked into hostile boardrooms, spine straight, chin level, eyes forward. Not defiant, just unbothered in a way that made everyone watching feel, somewhere deep in their gut, that they were witnessing a mistake being made in real time. Captain Whitfield stood by the cockpit door with his arms crossed, jaw set, radiating the satisfaction of a man who believed he had just restored order to his aircraft. As she passed him, Marlene stopped, just for a moment. She looked at the 4 gold stripes on his sleeve, then up at his face. "Captain Whitfield," she said, reading his name tag aloud slowly like she was filing it somewhere permanent. "Thank you. You've made my next decision remarkably easy." He snorted. "Have a nice day, ma'am." "Oh, I will." And she walked off Flight 1174 down the jet bridge, past a gate agent who wouldn't meet her eyes, and into the fluorescent hum of Terminal B behind her. The aircraft door swung shut with a hydraulic sigh. Inside, Whitfield returned to his cockpit. The woman in the cream coat slid happily into 3A. The flight pushed back only 9 minutes behind schedule, and everyone on board went back to their lives, believing the incident was over. It was 10:47. The incident was 3 hours from beginning. Back in the cabin, Priya, the young flight attendant with the tablet, couldn't shake it. Something about the removed passenger's name had snagged in her memory like a thread on a nail. During the climb, once the seatbelt sign dimmed, she opened the passenger manifest again. Bishop Marlene, a frequent flyer status, Diamond Elite, the highest tier the airline offered. Lifetime miles, over 2 million. But it was the fare code that made Priya's stomach drop, a corporate designation she'd only seen in training materials. HMICORP, the Hale and Marrow account. The account every transcontinental employee knew about the way sailors know about the ocean, because it was the water the company floated on. Priya stared at the screen. They hadn't just removed a diamond passenger. They had removed the passenger, and the captain had done it shouting. Meanwhile, Marlene sat in a quiet corner of the terminal, and here's what she didn't do. She didn't post a video. She didn't call a journalist. She didn't even raise her voice at the customer service desk, where a nervous agent offered her a rebooking and a $200 travel voucher, which she declined with a politeness that somehow felt heavier than fury. Marlene Bishop had spent 30 years learning that anger is a currency, and she never spent it where it earned no interest. Instead, she opened her laptop, connected to the airport Wi-Fi, and did what procurement directors do. She pulled up a spreadsheet. Not just any spreadsheet, the spreadsheet. The one her team updated quarterly. Transcontinental Airways versus Meridian Air versus Pacific National. On-time performance. Route overlap with Hale and Marrow's 41 offices. Negotiated fare structures. Service escalation records. For 8 years, Transcontinental had won that comparison, partly on numbers and partly because Marlene had vouched for them personally in rooms where her word carried weight. She looked at the column labeled Meridian Air. The gap had narrowed every year. Last quarter, it was less than 2%. Then she opened her email, typed a single line to her chief financial officer, and pressed send. Pause the Transcontinental renewal. I want the Meridian proposal on my desk by Thursday. I'll explain in person. Somewhere over Tennessee, Flight 1174 cruised on, blissfully unaware it had just become the most expensive flight in the company's history. The first tremor hit Transcontinental's headquarters in Dallas at 2:15 that afternoon, and it arrived the way disasters usually do, as a routine email nobody wanted to open. Victor Salas, vice president of commercial sales, was in his corner office on the 14th floor, half listening to a conference call about baggage fees, when his account director for corporate partnerships, a meticulous man named Owen, appeared in his doorway holding his phone like it was radioactive. "Victor, the Hale and Marrow renewal just went on hold." Victor muted the call. "On hold how?" We're 11 days out. The terms are agreed. We've been building the announcement deck. Their travel management company sent formal notice 20 minutes ago. Renewal paused pending internal review. And Meridian, Owen swallowed. Word is Meridian got invited to resubmit. Today. Victor stared at him. The Hale and Marrow account wasn't just an account. It was $200 million a year in guaranteed revenue. It was 40,000 seats. It was the case study Victor personally presented to the board every quarter, the contract that had paid for his lake house, his title, and his reputation as the man who never lost a corporate client. Airlines fought wars over accounts a tenth that size. Get Marlene Bishop on the phone, Victor said. We've known each other 8 years. Whatever this is, we'll fix it over dinner. That's the thing. Owen looked down at his phone. Her office says she's unavailable, indefinitely. And Victor, her assistant, said something strange. She said, Ms. Bishop suggests you speak with your flight operations department, specifically Flight 1174 out of Atlanta this morning. The words meant nothing to Victor yet. That was the cruelty of it. For another 90 minutes, he genuinely could not imagine what a random morning flight to Seattle had to do with the biggest contract of his career. He had Owen pull the flight records. Ordinary flight. Departed 9 minutes late. No mechanical issues, no diversions, no medical emergencies. Just one small line item in the ops log, 6 words long, the kind filed dozens of times a week across the network. Passenger removed at captain's discretion. Victor read the passenger's name and the floor of his stomach gave way. He didn't shout. Men like Victor don't shout when the building catches fire. They go very quiet and very fast. Within 20 minutes, he had the gate agent's statements, the supervisor's incident report, and because someone in the Atlanta crew lounge had already whispered about it, an unsolicited written account from a junior flight attendant named Priya Nair, who had documented the entire event with timestamps before the aircraft even landed in Seattle. Her report was clinical, careful, and devastating. The passenger was in her correct, assigned seat. The manifest confirmed it. No verification was attempted. The captain escalated within approximately 40 seconds of arriving in the cabin. The passenger remained calm throughout. And then the sentence Victor read 4 times. I believe the passenger was treated in a manner inconsistent with how other first-class passengers are treated, and I do not believe the outcome would have been the same for a different passenger in the same seat. A 26-year-old flight attendant, 8 months on the job, had put in writing what the airline's lawyers would spend weeks trying not to say out loud. Victor called flight operations. Then he called the chief pilot's office in Atlanta. Then, against every instinct of corporate self-preservation, he asked for Captain Dale Whitfield's personal cell. Whitfield was in a hotel shuttle in Seattle when he answered, relaxed, unhurried, a man at the end of a routine day. This is Whitfield. Captain, this is Victor Salas, VP of Commercial Sales in Dallas. I need to ask you about a passenger you removed this morning. Whitfield actually chuckled. The seat dispute. Handled it. Woman refused to cooperate with crew instructions. I've got authority over my aircraft and I used it. Is this really something a sales guy needs to? Do you know who she was? Doesn't matter who she was, that's the whole point of the rules. Victor closed his eyes. Captain, she controls the Hale and Marrow travel account. $200 million a year, 40,000 flights. And as of 2 o'clock today, that contract is on hold and our biggest competitor is in her inbox. There was a long pause on the line. Shuttle noise. Then Whitfield's voice, smaller now but still gripping the wheel of his certainty. Well, how was I supposed to know that? You weren't, Victor said. You were supposed to check the manifest. That night, 2 very different phone calls happened in 2 very different hotel rooms, and the distance between them told the whole story. In Seattle, Captain Dale Whitfield sat on the edge of a stiff hotel bed, still in uniform, replaying the call from Dallas. He wasn't worried, not exactly. He'd been flying for 31 years. He had a spotless safety record, a union behind him, and a rulebook that gave captains broad discretion over their aircraft. He'd removed maybe a dozen passengers over his career, drunks mostly, a guy who wouldn't stop vaping. Nobody had ever called him about any of them. So he did what men like Whitfield do when the ground shifts. He rewrote the morning in his head until he was the reasonable one. The woman had been argumentative. She'd refused to move. There had been a dispute, and disputes on his aircraft got resolved his way. By his second miniature bourbon from the minibar, he'd polished the memory to a comfortable shine. Some sales executive in Dallas was panicking over money. That wasn't a captain's problem. Money wasn't safety. He went to bed and slept fine. He would be the last person in the entire airline to sleep fine for quite some time. 1,200 miles away, in a hotel in downtown Seattle, because Marlene had simply taken Meridian Air's 1:30 departure and landed only 4 hours behind her original schedule, a different conversation was unfolding. Marlene sat by the window with her shoes off and her laptop open, and on the screen was the face of Richard Hale III, Chief Executive Officer of Hale and Marrow Industries, calling from his study in Connecticut. "Marlene, I got your note." Then I got a very anxious call from our CFO. Then I got an even more anxious call from someone named Victor Salas, who apparently found my office number in under 6 hours, which I'll admit is impressive. Richard leaned toward the camera. "So, tell me what happened on that plane," she told him. Flatly, precisely, no adjectives she couldn't prove. The seat, the woman in the cream coat. The captain emerging from the cockpit, deciding in 2 seconds, refusing to spend 90 more verifying the manifest. The pointed finger, the shout, the silent cabin. Richard listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You know," he said, 8 years ago when you consolidated all our travel with Transcontinental, half my board thought it was too much exposure to one carrier. You stood in that room and said, 'I'll stake my judgment on them.' I remember the phrase because you don't say things like that often." "I remember it too," Marlene said. "That's the problem, Richard. This isn't personal pique. If it were just my pride, I'd take the apology, take the miles, and move on. I've been swallowing worse since before that captain had his first stripe. This is a supplier evaluation. Their crew culture is a service variable. Yesterday, I got a first-hand data point on what their frontline does under ambiguity, to whom and how fast. And I got 40 witnesses on how the system around that behavior responded. It didn't." Richard smiled slightly. "Only you could get thrown off a plane and turn it into a procurement audit. Everything is a procurement audit if you're paying attention." She pulled up a document. "Here's what I want you to understand before this gets loud, because it will get loud. I'm not recommending we cancel Transcontinental as punishment. I'm recommending we make the renewal conditional. Real conditions, contractual ones with teeth. And if they can't meet them, Meridian's proposal lands Thursday, and their numbers close to within 2 points of Transcontinental's last quarter. This is defensible on the math alone. And if the press gets hold of it, someone on that plane was filming. There's always someone filming. Then we say nothing," Marlene said. "Not one word. We're a customer reviewing a supplier. The moment I become a headline, this becomes a story about my feelings. I need it to stay a story about their operations." Richard studied her through the screen, this woman who'd been publicly humiliated 14 hours ago and had responded by building a leverage structure. "You have the board's backing. Whatever you decide." He paused. "Marlene, I am sorry it happened to you." "So am I," she said. "Now let's make it expensive." She hung up, opened her inbox, and found 9 missed calls from Victor Salas. She let them sit. The video surfaced at 6:42 the next morning, posted by a college student who'd been sitting in seat 5C, and it did what these videos always do. It went off like a flare, 41 seconds long. It opened mid-shout, "Get her off the plane. Now." The captain's arm extended, finger aimed. Then it followed the woman in the burgundy suit as she rose, took down her own bag, and walked the aisle with a stillness that read, on camera, almost like slow motion. It caught her stopping at the cockpit door. You couldn't hear what she said to the captain, but you could see him smirk, and you could see her nod once, like a woman closing a file. The clip ended on the cabin, rows of passengers staring straight ahead, doing absolutely nothing. The caption, "She was in her assigned seat. They checked after she left. Nobody said a word, including me. I've thought about it all night." By 9 a.m. it had 2 million views. By noon, 11 million. The internet did its work. Someone identified the airline from the seat fabric, Someone identified the flight number from the departure boards visible in a second clip, and then, inevitably, someone identified her. That's Marlene Bishop. She runs global procurement for Hale and Marrow. My company negotiated against her once. Those crews have no idea what they just did. That comment alone got 400,000 likes, and the story split into two stories: the outrage and the delicious, ticking countdown of consequence. On the 14th floor in Dallas, Victor Salas watched the view counter climb like floodwater and understood that his careful, quiet containment plan was now ash. Corporate communications wanted to release a statement. Legal wanted to release nothing. The CEO's office wanted answers to questions Victor had been asking for 18 hours already. And through all of it, one fact sat on his desk like a stone. Marlene Bishop still hadn't returned a single call. She hadn't posted, hadn't commented, hadn't confirmed or denied she was even the woman in the video. Her silence was the loudest thing in the news cycle, because everyone watching understood that somewhere, in some office, a $200 million decision was being made by the one person who refused to perform her anger for the cameras. A business columnist put it best that afternoon: companies survive viral outrage all the time. Outrage has a half-life of a week. What Transcontinental should fear is not the 12 million people watching. It's the one woman who isn't. The airline's first statement landed at 2 p.m. and made everything worse, as first statements usually do. We are aware of a video circulating. We hold our crews to the highest standards. The safety and comfort of all passengers is our priority. We are reviewing the matter internally. 93 words, 0 of which were apology, error, or her name. The internet shredded it in minutes. Meridian Air's social media team, displaying the restraint of a shark in a swimming pool, posted a photo of a smiling cabin crew that same hour with the caption, "Every seat is your seat. Welcome aboard." It was shameless. It worked. In Seattle, Captain Whitfield's phone began to change character. First, it was his union rep telling him not to speak to anyone, which he took as routine protection. Then it was the chief pilot's office, informing him he was being pulled from his return rotation pending review, which he took as bureaucratic theater. Then it was his daughter in Phoenix, and that call he couldn't file away so easily. "Dad, the video, is that you? Sweetheart, there's context. You pointed at her. You pointed, Dad, like she was." His daughter stopped. She was in her seat. They're saying she was in her own seat. The crew reported a dispute. I resolved it. That's the job. Did you check? 4 words. He'd fielded them from a sales VP and swatted them away. From his daughter, they got through the hull. Whitfield sat in his hotel room with the curtains drawn, watching himself on a stranger's phone screen for the 40th time, and for the first time he noticed something he'd missed in every previous viewing: not her face, but his own. The certainty on it. The comfort. Meanwhile, in Atlanta, a junior flight attendant named Priya Nair was called into a conference room where 2 managers and a lawyer sat waiting, her written report on the table between them. "We'd like to talk," one said carefully, "about what you think you saw." Priya looked at the report, then at them. "I know what I saw." The conference room in Atlanta had no windows, which Priya decided was fitting. The lawyer introduced herself with a handshake that was all fingertips, and the senior of the 2 managers, a man named Gerald from Crew Relations, opened with the tone of a dentist promising this wouldn't hurt. "Priya, first, nobody's in trouble here. We just want to make sure the record is accurate. You've been flying, 8 months? Sometimes early in a career, situations can look one way from the back of the cabin and be something entirely different up front. Captain Whitfield has 31 years of experience. His judgment in the moment carries certain context. Your report is quite strong in its language, words like inconsistent treatment, words that could be misread. We thought you might want the opportunity to revise it." There it was, not an order, an opportunity. Deniable, gentle, and utterly unmistakable. Priya was 26 years old. She had student loans, a lease, and a mother in New Jersey who told everyone at church that her daughter worked in first class. She needed this job the way most people need their job, which is to say completely. And she thought about all of that in the silence they left for her, the same silence she'd stood in on the plane with her mouth open and nothing coming out. "On the aircraft," she said slowly, "I didn't say anything. I watched it happen and I froze, and I've regretted it every hour since. That report is the only part of this I got right." She slid it back across the table untouched. "I wrote what happened. If the company's position is that what happened shouldn't have been written down, I'd like that in writing." The lawyer's pen stopped moving. Gerald smiled the way people smile when they've lost. "That won't be necessary." What Priya couldn't know was that her report had already escaped the building. Not leaked, requested. Because that same Thursday morning, 900 miles away, a document had landed on Victor Sala's desk that reorganized the entire company's understanding of the crisis. It arrived not from a law firm, not from a PR agency, but from the procurement office of Hale and Marrow Industries. 14 pages. Marlene Bishop's first and only communication since the incident. It was not a complaint. It was a term sheet. Victor read it 3 times, and with each pass, his awe grew alongside his dread. There was no mention of the video, no mention of her feelings, no demand for the captain's firing. His name didn't even appear. Instead, the document laid out conditions for the renewal of the corporate travel agreement, drafted with the cold precision of someone who had spent 30 years reading suppliers' contracts for weak joints. Mandatory manifest verification before any passenger removal, absent immediate physical threat, written into the contract as a service term, with per-incident financial penalties. Quarterly reporting to Hale and Marrow of all involuntary removals across the network, broken down by cabin and demographics, audited by a third party. Contractual protection for crew members who report service failures. That clause, Victor realized with a jolt, was aimed at protecting someone specific. De-escalation and bias training for all customer-facing staff, not as a press release but as a deliverable, with completion rates tied to a 2% rebate trigger. And the last page, the one that made the CFO go pale in the meeting an hour later. The contract term cut from 5 years to 18 months, renewable only upon verified compliance, with Hale and Marrow retaining the right to shift up to 40% of volume to a secondary carrier at any time. The message beneath the legalese was perfectly clear. You will not be punished for what one man did. You will be measured permanently on whether your system allows it to happen again. And you will live on a short leash while we watch. "She's not walking away," Victor murmured, reading the final clause again. "That's the genius of it. Walking away costs her leverage. She's staying as the auditor." His deputy, Owen, leaned over the term sheet. "Legal will hate this. Ops will hate this. The pilots' union will riot over the removal clause. And if we refuse?" Owen didn't answer because the answer was on page 14, in the politest sentence Victor had ever been threatened with. Should these terms prove unworkable, Hale and Marrow thanks Transcontinental for 8 years of partnership and will conclude its carrier review with the remaining candidates. Meridian's proposal, Victor knew, was already on her desk. The war over Marlene Bishop's 14 pages began at 7 a.m. Friday in Transcontinental's executive boardroom, and it was the kind of war companies only fight when someone has finally forced them to look in a mirror. The chief operating officer called the manifest verification clause an operational handcuff. The head of legal warned that agreeing to demographic reporting was an admission dressed as a metric. The pilots' union representative, invited by video for exactly 11 minutes, used the phrase erosion of captain's authority 6 times before being politely disconnected. And through it all, the CFO kept a single slide on the screen behind them, updating in real time, showing what the markets thought. The stock down 4% since the video, 2 other corporate accounts requesting clarity on the incident, and a Meridian Airpress event scheduled with theatrical cruelty for the following Tuesday. Victor Salas let them exhaust themselves. Then he stood up and did the most dangerous thing of his career. He told the truth to a room that outranked him. "Everyone here keeps calling this a crisis. It's not. It's an invoice." He tapped the term sheet. For 8 years, this account subsidized route expansions, upgraded half our fleet's cabins, and paid for bonuses in this room. What did it cost us? Nothing until yesterday. Now the bill's arrived, and I've read it carefully, and here's what nobody wants to say out loud. There is not one clause in these 14 pages we shouldn't already be doing. He looked around the table. She's not asking us to be woke. She's asking us to check the manifest. Gentlemen, if verifying a boarding pass before publicly humiliating a customer is an operational handcuff, what exactly is our operation? Silence. Then the CEO, a gray, careful man named Bradford who had said nothing for an hour, spoke 5 words. Sign it, all of it. But signing, it turned out, was the easy part. Marlene's reply to the executed term sheet arrived that afternoon, 1 paragraph long, and it contained a condition she had deliberately left off the 14 pages because she wanted to see their real posture before revealing it. Before the renewal took effect, she required 1 in-person meeting, not with Victor, not with the CEO. She wanted the captain in the room. The request detonated quietly through the building. Legal called it a liability minefield. The union called it a struggle session and threatened to advise Whitfield to refuse. HR drafted 3 pages of talking points for a conversation nobody could script. And in a hotel room in Seattle where he'd been quietly parked pending review for 4 days, flying nothing, answering nothing, Dale Whitfield received the message and felt something he hadn't felt since his first solo flight at 19, the total absence of a checklist. His union rep was blunt on the phone. You can decline. They can't force this. Frankly, I'd decline. And then what happens? Then the review proceeds. Look, Dale, between us, the company needs a resolution more than it needs you. If she wants a meeting and you refuse, don't be shocked if you become the resolution. Whitfield hung up and sat with that. 31 years, and his airline had just been described to him as a party on the other side of the table. He'd spent 4 days in this room cycling through the stations of a man in trouble, indignation, technicalities, drafts of statements he never sent. His daughter hadn't called back. The video had 31 million views, and in the comments, strangers debated him like a specimen. Classic, typical, you can tell he's done it before. That last one enraged him most because he genuinely didn't believe it was true, and then on the 4th night, unable to sleep, he found himself doing something the lawyers would have forbidden. He got out an old logbook and started remembering removals. The drunk in Denver, the vapor. And then uncomfortably others. A dispute in 2019, who had he believed and how fast? A gut call in 2016. He couldn't reconstruct the faces with certainty. That was the problem, he'd never had to. At 11 p.m. he called the chief pilot's office and left a message of 1 sentence. Tell them I'll be in the room. He told himself it was strategy. Some of it even was. But underneath the strategy sat the 4 words his daughter had left him with, still lodged where she'd thrown them. Did you check? The meeting was set for Monday, 9 a.m. Dallas. Marlene Bishop booked her own flight. She flew Meridian. The conference room on the 14th floor had been prepared like a summit between nations. Water glasses at precise intervals. Legal pads nobody would use. 7 transcontinental executives on one side of the table, 1 general counsel hovering by the window, and a chair at the head left conspicuously open. At 8:58, Marlene Bishop walked in alone, no lawyers, no assistants, 1 leather portfolio, and the room stood up like a courtroom. Captain Dale Whitfield stood last. He was in a suit, not a uniform, and it made him look strangely smaller, like a general out of medals. For 4 days he'd rehearsed opening lines. All of them evaporated when she crossed the room, extended her hand, and said, "Captain Whitfield, thank you for coming. That couldn't have been easy, and I want you to know it matters that you're here." Whatever he had braced for, fury, ice, triumph, it wasn't courtesy. Courtesy left him nowhere to stand. Marlene took her seat and addressed the room. "Gentlemen, you've signed the terms, so this meeting isn't a negotiation. You're wondering why I asked for it." She opened the portfolio and took out a single sheet of paper, laying it face down on the table. Because contracts change incentives, but they don't change understanding. And I need 1 person in this company to actually understand what happened on that airplane, not the lawyer's version, the real one. She turned to Whitfield. "Captain, I've read your file. May I tell you what's in it?" He nodded, jaw tight. 31 years, 19,000 hours, not one safety violation. 3 commendations, including one for a diversion in 2011 that likely saved a passenger's life. You are, by every measure your profession uses, an excellent pilot. She let that sit. That's what makes you useful to me. Because if you were a monster, this would be easy. Your company could fire the monster, issue the press release, and change absolutely nothing. Monsters are convenient, Captain. You're something much more common. You're a good man with a bad reflex inside a system that never once asked him to check it. Ms. Bishop, the general counsel began. "I'm not finished." She didn't raise her voice. The room simply quieted around it. "Captain, I want to ask you the question my own investigation couldn't answer. That morning, between the moment you left the cockpit and the moment you pointed at me, what did you actually see?" Whitfield had been prepped for this meeting by 2 lawyers and a union rep, all of whom had drilled a single commandment into him: admit nothing specific. He looked at the face-down sheet of paper. He looked at her. And 31 years of checklists finally produced their answer. "I saw a dispute," he said slowly. "A crew member said there was a problem with a passenger in 3A, and when I came out, I saw a well-dressed white woman standing in the aisle looking upset and a black woman sitting in the seat looking calm. And he stopped. The room had gone perfectly still. I decided the problem was the one sitting down. It took me 2 seconds and I never questioned it. Not on the plane. Not for days after. I told everyone you were difficult. You said one sentence to me and it was a request to check the manifest, and I heard it as defiance." His voice was flat now, a man reading his own accident report. "My daughter asked me if I checked. I've made 40,000 landings and I never once skipped a checklist. For a human being, I skipped it in 2 seconds." Nobody spoke. The general counsel had stopped writing entirely. "Thank you," Marlene said quietly. "That's the first true thing anyone from this airline has said to me in 6 days." Then she turned over the sheet of paper and slid it across the table. "This is my last condition, and it's not in the contract because it can't be enforced. It can only be volunteered." Whitfield read it. His eyebrows drew together. "This is, you want me to teach. The training program your company just committed to needs an instructor pilots will actually listen to. They won't listen to HR. They won't listen to a consultant. They'll listen to 4 stripes and 31 years telling them the story of the 2 seconds that cost his airline $200 million. She closed her portfolio. "Punishment is easy, Captain. I'm offering you something harder. Be the checklist." Whitfield didn't answer right away, and Marlene respected him more for it. A quick yes would have been performance, one more man telling a powerful customer what she wanted to hear. Instead, he folded the sheet of paper, put it in his breast pocket, and said, "I need to think about whether I'm the right man to say it, not whether it should be said." "That's the correct answer," Marlene said and stood. The meeting had lasted 22 minutes. The executives, who had prepared for 4 hours of trench warfare, watched her shake hands around the table and leave the way she'd left the airplane, unhurried, upright, finished. Victor Salas caught her at the elevator. "Ms. Bishop, 8 years and I never actually asked you why us. Back then, you had 3 carriers courting you." Marlene pressed the button. "Because in the final presentation, your team was the only one that brought the people who'd actually run the account. Everyone else brought executives." The doors opened. "You won that contract with the frontline, Victor. Last week, you nearly lost it the same way. There's a lesson in there your board should frame." The doors closed on her, and Victor stood in the hallway, understanding at last that they had never really been negotiating with a customer. They'd been audited by one for 8 years without knowing it. The renewal was announced quietly 10 days later. No press conference, no smiling photo, at Marlene's insistence. 18 months, conditional terms, secondary carrier clause active. The business press, hungry for a dramatic divorce, found the ending almost confusing. "Hale and Marrow stays with Transcontinental." The headlines read, under terms analysts call unprecedented. One aviation reporter obtained the demographic reporting clause and wrote a piece titled "The Contract That Watches," predicting correctly, it would turn out, that 2 other Fortune 500 travel departments would demand identical language within the year. Procurement officers, it emerged, all read the same newsletters. Marlene had known that. It was the entire point. She hadn't just changed one airline's terms, she'd published a template. Priya Nair learned about the crew protection clause the way everyone at her base did, through a company-wide memo about enhanced reporting integrity standards. She was rereading it in the crew lounge, wondering, when her phone buzzed with an email from an address she didn't recognize. 3 sentences. Ms. Nair, I've read your report. On the aircraft, silence had 30 voices and courage had none. On paper, it had exactly 1, and it was yours. When you're ready for what comes after first class, my office door is open. M. Bishop. Priya read it 11 times. Then she called her mother in New Jersey, and for a while neither of them could talk properly. As for Captain Whitfield, the airline's review concluded with a suspension already served, mandatory retraining, and a demotion off the premium transcontinental routes, a resolution the internet predictably split over. Too soft, said half. Witch hunt, said the other half. Both sides moved on within a week because the internet always does. Whitfield did not move on. 6 weeks after the meeting in Dallas, he stood for the first time in front of a room of 40 pilots in a training center outside Fort Worth, most of them senior, several of them openly hostile, arms crossed in the universal posture of men waiting to be lectured. He didn't lecture. He put up one slide, a frame from the video, his own pointing arm frozen mid-shout, and said, 31 years, 19,000 hours, 0 violations. This is the only picture of my career anyone will ever remember. I'm going to walk you through the 2 seconds that created it, and then I'm going to prove to you that every man in this room has the same 2 seconds in him, because I would have sworn I didn't. By the end of the hour, the arms had uncrossed. By the end of the year, the session, pilots called it the Whitfield Hour, was the only mandatory training in company history with a waiting list. He never once said Marlene's name in it. He didn't have to. Everyone knew. And on a Tuesday in late autumn, a small envelope arrived at Hale and Marrow's procurement office. Inside was a captain's epaulette, 4 gold stripes, and a note in careful handwriting. You said be the checklist. Item 1 is complete. D.W. Marlene put it in her desk drawer, next to the boarding pass for Seat 3A. 1 year later, almost to the day, Marlene Bishop boarded transcontinental Flight 1174 from Atlanta to Seattle, and she did it on purpose. Same route, same departure time. Seat 3A requested specifically. Her assistant had asked, gently, whether she was sure the airline would have happily sent a private jet, a chartered apology with leather seats. Marlene declined. The whole point, she said, is that I board like everyone else and get treated like everyone else. If I need special handling to be safe from them, the contract failed. So she walked down the jet bridge as an ordinary passenger, one of 40,000 her company would send through those doors that year, and she watched everything. The gate agent who scanned her pass and said, "Welcome aboard, Ms. Bishop," with eye contact. The purser who verified a seat duplication in row 4, an actual glitch, 2 passengers with passes for the same seat, by pulling up the manifest on a tablet, apologizing to both, and resolving it in 90 seconds without a single raised voice. Marlene timed it. 90 seconds. The exact length of the check that would have cost Captain Whitfield nothing once upon a time. She didn't announce herself, but somewhere over Tennessee, a flight attendant paused by her row. Young, composed, a purser's stripes new on her sleeve. Ms. Bishop, I don't know if you remember me. Marlene looked up and smiled. Priya Nair, I remember everything about that flight. Congratulations on the promotion. They put me on the Integrity Review Board, the one from the contract. Priya hesitated. I read the removal reports for the whole network now, every quarter. Involuntary removals are down 61%. And the ones that still happen, they're documented, verified, clean. People ask why the numbers moved. I tell them the truth. Somebody finally made it more expensive to guess than to check. That, in the end, was the whole story, and Marlene knew it better than anyone. Not a triumph. A correction, the same word another CEO had used on another stage, because the people who live this learn the same vocabulary. Nothing about that year had made the world just. A captain's reflex still lived in 10,000 other captains, in gate agents and managers and hearing committees and emergency rooms, in every room where someone with 2 seconds of power decides who belongs. One contract couldn't fix that. One viral video couldn't either. The internet had already forgotten Flight 1174, buried under 100 newer outrages. But systems remember what people forget. That was Marlene's faith, the procurement officer's creed. Outrage evaporates, clauses compound. Somewhere in a filing cabinet in Dallas sat 14 pages that would outlast every news cycle, quietly making the right thing cheaper than the wrong thing, quarter after quarter, long after everyone stopped watching. And in 3 other corporate headquarters, then 5, then 9, travel departments had copied her language word for word, because that's the other thing about procurement officers. They all read the same newsletters. When the plane landed in Seattle, Marlene turned on her phone to a message from her granddaughter, age 9, who had recently discovered what her grandmother did for a living and found it disappointing compared to astronaut. "Grandma, what do you actually do all day?" Marlene sat in seat 3A while the cabin emptied around her and typed. "I read the fine print, baby. Somebody has to. Because the fine print is where they hide how they really plan to treat you, and if you learn to read it, one day you get to write it." Then she gathered her bag, thanked the crew by name, and walked up the jet bridge, unhurried, upright, finished, past a gate where nobody looked at her twice, which was, after everything, the entire victory. Not applause, not headlines. Just an ordinary woman in seat 3A, left in peace, because it now costs too much to do otherwise. Here's the truth this story leaves us with. Dignity should never require leverage. But until the world works the way it should, know exactly what you bring to every table you sit at, and never let a room full of silence convince you that you're the one who doesn't belong. You are not the problem. And if the room can't see your worth, remember, rooms can be renegotiated. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment telling us what you would have done in seat 3A, subscribe and turn on notifications, because stories like Marlene's deserve to be told, and there are more coming. Stay dignified, stay sharp, and always, always read the fine print. Peace.